Okay, hi everyone. While we're waiting for people to join, we have some people starting to join in. I just want to give you guys a few opening comments. This is the first of the seminars in this professional enrichment seminar series, where we bring you a variety of different professional enrichment and career development resources across Columbia. We're delighted to start out today with this first one, and we'll introduce the speaker in just a moment. Just a few housekeeping notes for those of you who are new to our webinars. You are all muted when you first join. We would ask you to stay on mute unless you're called upon, unless you raise your hand to ask a question, or the speaker or the moderator asks you to join, in which case we will unmute you. Please save your questions until the end, and then either use the raise hand or the chat box to pose a question. Throughout the seminar, if we don't see your name attached to whatever handle you're on, we will be asking you to tell us your name so that we are able to easily follow up with you afterwards. So if you see a chat coming in asking you for some information, that would be great. At the end of the seminar, you guys will get a short survey asking you about your experience, and we would ask that you would just turn that around and answer it as quickly as you can. Okay, I think it's 4 o'clock. Sorry, there's a little noise in the back of my my home here. It's 4 p.m. So we can get started. I see Anil is on. Anil, did you want to introduce the speaker, or shall I introduce our speaker?
No, I just want to thank you, Danielle, and go ahead, Emer. Thank you.
Great. Okay, so I can pull up my intro notes. So we are very pleased and very grateful to have Danielle Matsushima with us from the VP&S Office for Research. Dr. Matsushima is a graduate of Columbia. She got her a degree, I should say, in North Carolina in Chapel Hill, and her PhD here at Columbia in 2016. She is a very important and wonderful member of the Office for Research, heading up the grant proposal development and grant development services with that team. And we're delighted that she's going to speak to us today about that team's availability of grant resources, education, and tools. So Danielle, thanks so much, and we'll hand it over to you.
Sorry, had myself on mute. Thank you for that lovely introduction, Emer, and thank you, Anil and the Cancer Center for inviting me to talk about what we in the Office of Research can do to help people apply to grants. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and start. So just the agenda, I'll talk about what I hope you guys get out of this seminar, and I'll go through the grant lifecycle, and throughout it pointing out how you guys can find funding, certain grants for trainees and ESI faculty, what makes a strong candidate, strong mentor, resources throughout Columbia that you can utilize as you apply, and then time for questions. I'm also fine with being interactive with questions because I know that there's a lot of material that you guys probably have questions about. So feel free to interrupt me as I go along. So what I hope you guys learn from this is that trainees, graduate students, and postdocs, the ESI faculty, and the mentors understand that there are various types of funding opportunities to which trainees and the ESI faculty can apply. And I hope that you guys understand what makes a strong applicant or candidate, and also what makes a strong mentor for these types of awards. I also hope that you guys know that there are several resources here at Columbia that are available to you, so that, you know, when you're thinking about applying to grants and you think you're staring up at this huge, massive climb that you need to do, that we're here to help you to make sure you get to the top and you submit a successful, compelling proposal. So if this wasn't a Zoom, I would open this up for why apply for a grant, but I've gone ahead and filled in some of these answers for you guys. So typically people apply to a grant to fund their research because they want protected time, so time off from being an educator or being a clinician in order to do research. Getting a grant helps you get future funding to then fund your next research idea. So you can see there's almost a cyclicality to the grant lifecycle here, starting with developing an idea, finding funding for that idea, and then preparing a proposal, submitting it. Hopefully, you then get awarded. You can then conduct the project, and then you close out the project, and hopefully, you know, what you learned as you were conducting the science leads to a new idea or a new grant. So I'm gonna go through all of these different phases and try to point out resources throughout Columbia that you can utilize for each one of these steps of the grant cycle. So let's start with developing an idea. So no matter what idea you have in mind, whether it's, you know, research that you came into because you're part of your mentor's lab, or maybe with the new COVID pandemic, you're coming up with new ideas, no matter whatever idea you come up with, you wanna make sure that idea isn't already funded. And there are different resources available to help you do that. You can do a literature search on PubMed. You can use Web of Science, and I don't know if you guys know about it, but I wanted to just show you really quickly what it is. So Web of Science is a database where you can look up a basic search about a topic you have, search, and you can get all kinds of, I'm sorry, gotta sign in, all kinds of articles associated with that topic. And sorry, autocorrect just changed that. There we go. And what will happen is that I typed in COVID-19 and all these publications are coming up. You can click on any one of these and it can tell you the number of times this grant has been cited, and, or sorry, this publication has been cited, and the number of references within here. And so from there, you can click into this and really try to figure out whether or not your topic has been published or worked on before. Okay, so it's a really great resource. Also, NIH has a database called NIH Reporter, and you can look up all funded abstracts. And so therefore you can see like the type of work that's being funded for any given institute and the amount of work proposed for any particular type of mechanism. So once you've come up with an idea and you've made sure that no one else is working on that idea, you can try to find funding to fund that project. So there's two main types of funding: the federal funding, so that's National Institutes of Health, Department of Defense, the National Science Foundation, et cetera, so things that are governmental funded. There's also a lot of non-federal funding, so the American Cancer Society, the National Multiple Sclerosis Society, the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. A lot of private foundations have a lot of funding that fit in with their mission, okay? And so just put a few examples here, but again, all different types, and they fund all different types of awards as well. So you can go to those individual sites and they'll have a list of all the different funding mechanisms. So grants.gov will have DOD, NSF, NIH. NIH will have NIH. You go to the American Cancer Society, they'll have all of the funds listed for American Cancer Society. So if you know that you want to be funded by any particular agency, going to their website and looking at their funding is a great way to do that. But say you just want to find funding for a particular topic, Columbia subscribes to this tool called Pivot. And Pivot is essentially a database where you can search for funding of all government and private all at once. So as of yesterday, there was $75 billion available for you guys to get funding for your research. And again, just a quick little demo. So you can log into Pivot, do an advanced search where you can put in your field or put in your topic of interest. If you're looking for a particular award amount, you can put that in. What may be important for some people is citizenship or residency requirements. NIH, for instance, for a lot of their fellowship and career development awards will only fund US residents or permanent residents. You can also look at, whether or not an academic institution can apply, et cetera. So you can really narrow down your searches from there. Okay. So once you've found funding, all of what's listed tends to come in the form of an FOA, which is a funding opportunity announcement. And this is an example from NIH of what an FOA looks like. And FOAs are really important because they give you all types of information. And so different funders have different types of FOAs, but they all have more or less the same type of information. So this one's from NIH, this one is from NSF, and this one is from the DoD. So what can you learn from the FOA? You can learn the type of participating institutes. So for instance, you would want to make sure if you're applying to the NCI that the NCI participated in this funding opportunity announcement that you found, because you don't want to submit to NCI and they're like, we don't have funding for that. That's a waste of your time in terms of preparing this grant. You'll also find the FOA title. So for instance, this one is for Precision Medicine Initiative. You'll find key dates and notices associated with this FOA. That tends to be listed here. So often there'll be webinars or updates to NIH forms and requirements. So you do want to pay attention to those updated notices here. Further down, you'll find out a background of why they're funding this particular announcement. And again, that'll vary depending on what you're applying to, whether it's a fellowship or an R01, etc. You do want to make sure that you are eligible to apply, both you as well as Columbia, the applicant institution. Some mechanisms have a time frame with which you need to apply, a citizenship requirement, etc. You can also find budget information in the FOA, so that'll tell you how much, like whether or not you can fund your salary or how much money you can devote to the science. And then you'll also find out what proposal content you need to put in. And that will depend on the type of award that you're submitting. So a really quick overview. There are various different types of awards. Fellowships tend to be for students or postdocs, funding time with a mentor to learn, to conduct research and learn about a topic. Career development awards are for those that are not quite independent but want to be independent. And so a career development award is going to help you get to that independent stage. Individual research grants are for people who are independent and have a project that they want to fund. Pilot awards tend to be smaller amounts, funding one particular small project or aspect to get data, hopefully, to then apply for a larger grant. Training grants, so a lot of graduate students and postdocs here are on training grants or T32s, and this will fund applicants to work in labs and to work on projects, particularly around a certain program, okay? And at Columbia, we have like 37 training grants. We have quite a few. Sometimes people get travel awards to go to conferences, and those are pretty prestigious as well and good for you to put on your CV. Columbia, as well as other institutions, have internal awards that you can apply for and win, and that's a way, again, to get some pilot data for these larger types of awards. Some grants are limited submission, so maybe only one application can go in from Columbia, and so you need to pay attention to that. And then certain things are cooperative agreement instead of a grant. And what this means is if you get awarded one of these, the funding agency has some say in terms of what will happen throughout the duration of that award. And then a contract is different than a grant. So a contract is you are responsible for a deliverable or a particular type of work. Whereas a grant, you're funded more for an idea and you kind of get to see what happens and what progresses from that idea. So for the remainder of my talk, I'm predominantly going to focus on the first three because I think it's of interest to this crowd here, and predominantly for NIH funding because, again, since we're at the medical school, or most of us are at the medical school, so we're focused on NIH funding. So what is a fellowship award? So I know a lot of PhD students are thinking about applying for the August deadline. So the overall goal of the fellowship award is to ensure that there's a diverse pool of highly trained scientists that are available to be a part of the biomedical, behavioral, and clinical workforce, okay? And so what the fellowship does is it provides support, essentially funds, to any pre-doctoral or postdoctoral applicant to become productive and successful in an independent research career. And so the most common mechanisms that go in through Columbia are the F30, and this is for dual degree recipients, so MD, PhDs. This is great for you guys to apply because you can ask for up to 6 years of funding. We also see a lot of F31s, so for PhD students, this is what you guys would apply to, okay? And if you identify any of the underrepresented categories, you can apply for the particular FOA in diversity, okay? And then if you're a postdoc or a fellow thinking of an F, you would apply to the F32 mechanism, and you can ask for up to 3 years of funding for an F32. And F31s can ask for up to 5 years. So that's if you were thinking of applying for a fellowship and you had an idea that you wanted to pitch to NIH, you would use these announcement numbers, PA numbers were called parent announcements, and you would use that funding opportunity in order to apply for that grant. So moving on to the next stage, what is a career development award? So the purpose of a career development award is to support a postdoc or early career research scientist to get them to a point where they are an independent scientist, okay? So at CUMC, we have 4 different types of K awards that we often see, a K01, and this different institutes use the K01 differently, but often someone who applies for a K01 needs both advanced training, oops, sorry guys, and additional experience before they can be an independent investigator. A K08 is for clinician scientists that want to pursue research in an academic setting. Mostly, I see a lot of clinicians wanting to do basic science apply to a K08. A K23 is for those clinicians that want to commit to patient-oriented research. And then the K99 to R00 is a mechanism used to support 2 years of postdoc, and then essentially is giving you also funding for 3 years at an R01, or sorry, 3 years of R01 equivalent funding at whatever institution you're assistant professor at, okay? So those are the most common career development mechanisms we see. For those that are ESI faculty, you can apply for things like an R01, which is just a normal research grant. R03s are small research grants that tend to be more pilot awards. You can see that there's an R13 mechanism for conferences. You can also apply for R21s, which are a little bit more exploratory and tend to only be 2 years of funding. But one thing I want to point out is if you can see here at the R1s, there's 3 different types of R1s you can apply to. So what does that mean? Well, NIH recently decided that they were going to break up the PA numbers by whether or not you were allowed to do a clinical trial, so clinical trial not allowed or required, or whether or not you were doing basic experimental studies with humans. And so these 3 distinctions apply for all Ks and Rs. So don't be alarmed if you go look up and try to find a PA and there's 3 different types. Just simply look back at this slide or look at the NIH instructions and figure out which funding opportunity announcement you should apply to. I'm not going to read this all out for you guys though. Don't save you guys some time. Okay, so I do want to point out that in addition to the typical R1, ESI or early stage investigators have a number of other opportunities that they can apply to. So NIH defines ESI as someone who's completed their doctoral degree or postgraduate clinical training within the last 10 years and have never received an NIH R1 or equivalent type of award. So if you've gotten an R3, a K, or an R21, then you're still eligible for ESI status. And the importance of this is that you tend to have a better funding pay line, okay? They tend to not be as stringent if you're considered ESI faculty. So I just wanted to point out a few mechanisms because these are gonna come up and they will be due end of summer, beginning of the fall. So often a lot of new faculty apply for the DP2 or the NIH Director's Innovator Award. It's a high risk, high reward research program similar to R1 level funding. It's highly prestigious. Last year we had almost like 10 faculty apply, and this will be due late in August. So in the next couple months, this RFA should be coming out. For those that are very rare, but going from grad school to a faculty position, there's a DP5 award. So it's an NIH Director's Early Independence Program. Okay, and again, last year that was due in August. Other ESI faculty might want to apply to the NIGMS Mirror Award, and there's one specifically for ESI, not just for more senior faculty. And this award is interesting because it supports your research program and not just a project, right? So you can fund kind of multiple research projects at the same time under this award. So this announcement is already out, and this will be due at the beginning of October, okay? In addition to NIH, other governmental funding agencies have grants for early career as well. So the DoD has several career development awards. They're broken down by their different research programs. So whether it's breast cancer, general cancer, lung cancer, et cetera, you should look up and see whether or not that program is participating. They tend to be due in March. So we just missed the deadline for these this year. And then the eligibility in terms of whether or not you're a scholar or fellow or when you can apply varies. So you would have to look up into those. And as I mentioned before, a lot of the foundations have awards as well, and so they tend to have a lot of early career awards. So I listed one here for the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, and this cycle opens this summer, okay? So lots of funding for you guys to apply to. So once you identify funding for your idea, whether it's from NIH, DoD, you identify the right mechanism, it's time to start preparing your proposal. So as I said before, you could find instructions in the funding opportunity announcement. And for NIH, you also need to look at the SF 424 application guide. So these application guides are huge. They tend to be 400 pages. And so our office has kind of created a cheat sheet for you guys. So a checklist, and I'm going to show you one here. A checklist with hyperlinks to the different instructions, et cetera, so that you can really make sure you're not missing a piece of your grant. So this is internal stuff that your grants administrator will use, helpful links to instructions, page limits, etc. Due dates, this one's for a K award, okay? And on the left column here, we've listed all the different components that hyperlink to instructions in that 400-page PDF I was telling you guys about. This column is how long that attachment needs to be. And you can use this column to say, okay, I'm working on the project abstract, but it's not done yet, so right now it's gonna be a draft. And then you can use it to communicate with your grants administrator, okay, that one's ready to upload into the final system, etc. So this is just a way to help you guys stay organized so you know all the different components that happen. I'm not gonna go through all of these. That's what several of our courses are for, and I'll explain those to you in a little bit, okay? So the checklist, again, lists all the different components you need, but some are more important than others. For the Ks, the candidate section, the research strategy, mentor letters, your bio sketch, letters of reference tend to be more important, and that's because reviewers are going to really look at those for specific review criteria. So for the fellowship and the K award, the review criteria is actually pretty similar. You're going to be judged as the candidate, whether or not you are someone that they should fund and they see your potential to become an independent investigator, okay? You'll also be judged on the plan that you perform. So why are you applying for this award? Well, you're applying for a fellowship or K award because you want to gain experience with research, and you need to come up with a plan that helps you delineate what experience you need and some of the more softer skills you need to be successful for that next career stage. You'll also be judged on your actual research that you propose, more so for the K than the fellowship, but whether or not that research is impactful, whether it's a solid approach that you have in terms of answering your research question or research plan. The fourth thing that the reviewers will judge you on are your mentors or your sponsors, okay? Or other people that are part of your application, such as your advisory committee. And lastly, Columbia will be judged as whether or not it's a good institution and environment for you to receive your training. So each one of these sections gets a score of 1 to 9, and then they get averaged, and then you get a final score or an overall score. So reviewers will also look at these items, other attachments that you have to deal with. And again, we'll talk about these in all the other courses that we have, but the score part is this part here. For the R1, it's a little bit different. The score criteria is on the significance, you the investigator, whether or not your science is innovative, if your approach is solid, and is Columbia or you and your collaborators, do you guys have the environment to get the science done, okay? So the review criteria is really, really important that you're hitting all those sections. So now I'm gonna spend a little bit of time telling you what makes a strong candidate so you can get good scores here, and also what's important for a strong mentor, because these are things you can do before you're ready to apply, okay, to set yourself up for success. So what makes a good applicant or a candidate, and what can you do now for success later? So here in blue, I've listed several of the different criteria that I've seen coming through when I've seen summary statements. So often for fellowships, grades are important. You have to list them in your bio sketch. For the K award and the R1, they don't really look at your grades because you don't tell them about your grades. But honors and awards do factor in to whether or not they say you're a successful candidate. Your training background is very important, okay? So for the work you're proposing, they want to make sure that you're pretty qualified in order to do that work. And so you'll use your candidate section and the personal statement, your bio sketch, to explain what your scientific background is and why it sets you up to be successful for this grant you're applying for. Publications are also very important. At the PhD level, it's not necessary that you have a publication when you apply, but if you're a postdoc or ESI faculty, you definitely need publications, and hopefully at every career stage you've been to, okay? In particular for the K award, a lot of the comments that come back are that you haven't published with your current mentor, okay? So if you are in year 3 and thinking of applying for a K award, make sure that you also have a publication with your mentor before you do so, because you'll get dinged for that. Presenting at international and national conferences is really helpful for both the fellowship and the career development award. Previous funding is not necessary for the fellowship. It's really helpful for the K award, and so things like getting a pilot award, being on a competitive training grant, receiving a fellowship previously. Those are all helpful for both Ks and whether or not you're a first-time R1 seeker, okay? Because what this means is it means you're able to compete and get funding, and hopefully you have the publications to show that you were successful or you were productive with that funding that you received. For the fellowship and K award, you're also going to be judged on your potential career as an independent scientist. Less for the fellowship, especially now with a lot of PhDs going into non-academic but science-related careers. But if you do want to become an independent investigator, it's important that you sell that to NIH and tell them what you want to study and how you're going to get there. And so it's really important for the K award. ESI faculty, it's not as important about your potential, but they really want to see that you have the experience to carry out the project, okay? And in terms of institutional commitment, for PhDs and postdocs applying to fellowship, they want to see that you're part of a good program and that Columbia has a good intellectual environment to foster your career. For K award, this is very important because you're applying for K01, a K08, or K23. Reviewers tend to want to see that you have an assistant professor title or that you will be promoted to assistant professor, and that is not contingent on the award. And that's a huge, huge reviewer comment we get back, especially for people applying for K01 that are postdocs. Reviewers say, how can the institute be committed to you if they're not promoting you to assistant professor? Also, if you're applying for a K99, Columbia has to commit to sponsoring your visa if you are not a permanent resident, okay? Or a citizen. And then for ESI R1s, you will have to address some institutional commitment in the facility and resources section. So things like whether or not you have dedicated lab space. They do want to know a little bit of finances, so whether or not you're able to travel to where you need to go, or you can take the classes and training that you need. But all of that is listed in the facilities and resources instructions. Okay. So I told you what makes a good applicant or candidate. So what makes a good mentor? Mentors are someone who are committed to you long-term, both guiding your research and helping you in your professional development and career advancement, okay? Again, they oversee, guide, and troubleshoot your progress. They wear many hats. They can be an advisor, an advocate, a critic, which I'm sure we're all familiar with, an instructor, a counselor, a coach, someone to introduce you to their scientific network. Ultimately, they keep your best interests in mind, and they're not just saying, okay, you're a hard worker, what can I get out of you? They really want to foster your career and move it forward. Reviewers also look to see that your mentor has funding to support your research. These fellowships and career development plans come with very little scientific funding, so they support your salary, but not necessarily the science. So how's the science going to get funded? Well, through your mentor's grants, okay? They also like to see that your mentor has success with previous trainees, moving them from from their current career stage to the next level. So if you have an assistant professor as a mentor, you might want to think about having a co-mentor who is more senior and has a lot of experience moving, for instance, a postdoc to an assistant professor level or whatever career stage you're at. It's also helpful if they're well known or respected in their field for their work, okay? ESI faculty are not going to necessarily be judged for having a mentor, but if you are proposing to do research that you don't have experience with, they might judge you for whether or not you have co-investigators or collaborators, and if they're able to have that portion of the project working. And they may want to see previous collaboration or publications to show that or demonstrate that the collaboration will be successful if funded. Okay, so I gave you a little snapshot of what makes you a strong candidate and a strong mentor, and those are steps you can do years before you're ready to apply. But when you are ready to apply, I want you to know that there are resources on campus to help you go from climbing the mountain alone, and we can be here to help guide you to get you to the top, okay? So for the R1s, there's several things. The Irving Institute has a Reach for the R1 program that's really great. They do it for 2 deadlines, I want to say for the February 5th and the June 5th deadline. They accept 6 applicants and they meet quite often and will like workshop each other's grants. So it's a really great program. The Mailman School of Public Health, they will do an external review of anyone submitting a first-time R1. And then our office for the medical school, if you're applying for your first R1 and you count as ESI, we will actually partner you with a science writer to edit your proposal and make sure that your work is being presented in a clear and compelling manner. For K Awards, Harold Pincus and Catherine Monk in Psychiatry run a Psychiatry K workshop that runs from October to February. And they meet once a month and they go through different things, different components of the grant, such as candidate section, they'll even do a mock review, etc. For Mailman, the Research Resource Office will look at grants for you, and I think they also have a bank of applications for those in public health. And then our office runs the K Award program for on-time proposal preparation, or K-POP for short. And we run this in the 10 weeks leading up to every single deadline. And it's a combination of project management support, so what you need to do in every single week. And we also review specific games, BioSketch, et cetera, and we'll read through your career development plans and comments. So I run this with Daichi Shimbo and Yinghui Mao. It's been very successful for the last 3 years. For the fellowship programs, for the NIH fellowship, a lot of the programs on campus, such as neuro and genetics, have little workshops that they run. And recently, partnering with OGA, our office has been doing fellowship info sessions before every single deadline. So for those of you applying for August, we'll have one coming up in May that I'll tell you a little bit more about later. And these are 2-session info sessions, one where we go through all the components of the grant, and one where we talk about how to write a compelling specific aims and research strategy. There are also some resources that are applicable to all grants. So recently we partnered with CMC Faculty of Professional Development, and Daichi Shimbo teaches a Writing Effective Aims workshop. This happens 3 times a year to coincide with the 3 major R1 deadlines, so February, June, and October. And then Jamie Rubin teaches a funding and grantsmanship course every single spring, where she talks about the different types of funding you can have, all the different mechanisms, etc. So as I mentioned, our office is involved in specific individual investigator programs that you guys are more than welcome to attend. We also help more senior faculty with large and complex grants. And recently we've been getting involved with a lot of instrumentation grants. So if you're applying for an S10, our office may, if we have time, help you with a review of that. We're also creating resources such as the Grant Starter Kit and Facilities and Resources Bank. So the Grant Starter Kit, and I'm going to show you guys our new research intranet. So the Grant Starter Kit is behind the uni, and what you can do is we basically, for every single attachment, we've created a template. We have some examples and helpful links for anything. So if you log in, you can sort by whether or not you're applying for an F award, a K award, or an R, and the filters will all switch depending on that. And again, for each one of the attachments, we have essentially a little blurb about what goes in it. So here's where you can download checklists. If you're writing a K word and you have a candidate section, you can look and see templates and examples. So here's a little bit of instructions about it, link to the NIH instructions, and then a downloadable example, a template to follow, and some helpful information, okay? So if you're applying to a grant, I really recommend that you check out the Grant Starter Kit. We also have a Facilities and Resources Bank. So this is template descriptions of different resources, so whether or not they're Cancer Center shared resources, schools, etc. on campus, so that you can fill out your Facilities and Resources section. I also wanted to show you guys, we are sponsoring a institutional license to BioRender, and BioRender is a tool that you can use to make scientific figures, and it's pretty cool and simple and easy, and they have all these pre-made scientific icons, and you can just drop them in, and this is kind of like using PowerPoint, and you can create really nice figures. And so it's important that when you guys write your grants that you're presenting the concepts in a clear manner, and you can use BioRender to do that. So as an example, this is a grant that I'm currently working on with Betsy Bradshaw in neurology, and this is the figure before that we had, where you really have to stare at, and you're like, what are we looking at? Okay, well, this is healthy sorry, this is a Parkinson's disease substantia nigra. This is healthy. And then I guess this is, I don't know, a neuron. And it's like hard to kind of get what's going on. But you can reorganize this figure so that really quickly you can say, okay, well, there's 2 states, healthy, diseased. We're going to look at 4 different areas or maybe 4 different changes that are going to occur. And okay, there's 4 different teams that are going to work on those 4 different aspects. So just pointing out the power of a scientific figure. And a lot of people will put this type of schematic in their specific aims page or in their significance section. And this is a way to clearly show the reviewer what you're trying to do in your proposal, okay? And so BioRender has a lot of webinars to do. We're trying to get one scheduled in May, and I'm trying to decide if doing one for grant figures or doing one for presentations would be more useful. So feel free to comment in the chat box on that and vote. Okay, so I told you a lot of different resources available to help you prepare your presentation. And so now we're going to worry, now that we've got it all prepared, we're going to worry about submitting the grant. So when you submit your grant, you're going to work with your grant administrator. It might be in your department or your division. If you're in a basic science department, you'll probably use the grants management service. And this person is going to help you gain access to systems to submit your grant, help you track the proposal, to help you build your budget. They are also a great resource for policy updates from the sponsor that you are applying to. So really utilize them, get them involved as early as possible, not the day you're submitting. And then ultimately, when you're ready to submit, they'll be there to make sure that application gets submitted appropriately. If you're unsure of whether or not you're supposed to use the grants management service or your department, there's a little questionnaire that you can answer here to figure out who you should work with. So submission deadlines for NIH are pretty stringent for most PAs. So here I've listed the new and resubmission dates for R1s, for Ks, fellowships, new and resubmission dates are the same. And then if you're applying for HIV grants, and there's 3 different cycles that tend to happen throughout the year, okay? So the next deadlines will be June 5th, June 12th, and August 8th, okay, for the different grants. So once you submit your grant, it'll go to NIH and it'll get assigned to the Center of Scientific Review. And the Center for Scientific Review will assign it to a study section. Some fellowships and some K awards actually go straight to the institute. They don't go to this special center, but some, definitely for Ks, some Ks go to the CSR. From there, the CSR will organize the study section. Your application will go to a reviewer. It will get scored on those 5 criteria that I told you guys about earlier. Okay, and then study section will meet, and then they will review the top 50% of grants and decide on a final score. And based on that final score, it can then go to council for recommendation of whether or not it's funded or not funded. So that's kind of, that timeline is represented here. So I was showing you before the dates of when things are due. So let's focus on cycle 1. So if you were, or I guess we'll do cycle 2. So if you were applying for the June 5th deadline R1, you wouldn't hear back. Your study section would meet in October, November. You wouldn't get the summary statement back or your score back until November, December, okay? And if you got funded, then the first, if council decided to fund it, then the first time you could really start your project is next April. However, if you got a 30th percentile, which is not a fundable score, then what you can do is you can resubmit. But because you're getting your summary statement back in November to December, it's probably a little bit too late for the November 5th resubmission deadline. So you then would have to resubmit in March, which means that you couldn't then be getting your project to start until next September. I just wanted to point out the amount of time it takes if you do have to do a resubmission, because often with the fellowship and career development awards, people don't keep this in mind and don't realize that their funding is pretty far off, 9 months to a year and a half off, okay? And so with that in mind, hopefully you guys are thinking about submitting to either a fellowship or career development award early on. And so here's some example timelines of what to think about. So if you're a PhD student, year 1, you're thinking about doing rotations, okay, you join a lab. You can try to publish, but really start thinking about applying for either an F30 or F31, okay? And you should apply between years 2 and 4 because most PhD students will ask for 2 to 4 years of funding. And you don't want to be a year 4 graduate student asking for 4 years of funding because that means you'll be an 8th year graduate student and neither you, your mentor, or NIH wants that, okay? So really keep in mind that you should apply early on and adjust the amount of funding you're asking for depending on what year you're in, okay? For the F30, this will also cover part of medical school, so keep that in mind as well, okay? Just so you guys know, some of you graduate students, there is an F99 to K00 award, and NCI actually funds this, and this is for stellar graduate students that can get the end of their graduate school and the beginning of their postdoc funded, okay? And you should apply by years 3 or year 4, okay, of your graduate career. So for the K99s, there's a 4-year eligibility window on this, and I think a lot of people get surprised that they have to have been awarded by year 4, okay? So if you're planning to submit, this means that you really need to submit, by year 3, okay? So that you have time to do a resubmission before you hit that year 4 cutoff, which means that you need to start publishing pretty early on. So end of year 1, year 2, so that you can look competitive for when you submit here, okay? So I've got the pipette just showing research publication here, and then this is just preparing your application, and it can take between, I don't know, a month to half a year to prepare your application. I also want to point out that other types of career development awards, such as the NINDS K01, have specific eligibility requirements as well. So they only will fund postdocs up until year 6, okay? So again, it's really important to pay attention to the specific funding opportunity that you're applying to. So that 4-year eligibility window can be extended for K99s if you have well-justified leave for personal family situations. And I wanted to point out, since we're all in this COVID pandemic, you can ask for an extension based on COVID, but you would need to talk to your program officer to get this cleared, whether or not it's for personal family leave or for COVID reasons, okay? So I talked to you about preparing the proposal, submitting, the review process and how long it would take. And in this scenario, we're gonna assume that you guys got the award, so it's time to pop champagne. And then you can conduct science, which I'm not gonna tell you guys about because you guys all know how to do that. And then you would close out the project. So each year you would probably do a progress report to the funder, and at the very end, you would do one final one. And hopefully, the research that you created would then facilitate new funding, okay? So that's kind of the grant lifecycle. Remember that there are resources across campus to help you. Specifically, our office will be working with Faculty Affairs to host a AIMS workshop in July. If you're applying for the June 5th deadline, contact me about ESI editing services. If you're applying for career development work for June 12th, we started K-pop, but I'm happy to meet with you one-on-one to catch you up, okay? And then if you're a graduate student, look for an email from Mao in the next few weeks, because we're gonna have info sessions on May 21st to May 28th, okay? So with that, here's my contact info, our office's website, the grant starter kit, and BioRender can be reached on the research intranet. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Great, thank you so much, Danielle. Let me just turn my camera back on. That was terrific. Thank you very much. Everyone, you're most welcome to enter questions into the chat box or raise your hand if you have a question for Danielle. That was just a wonderful description of the grant process and lots of information, especially about the resources that are available across campus. I got one comment. Thank you very much, Danielle, for a great presentation. Perhaps I could start out with a quick question for you about ESI status and about there are certain pitfalls in keeping it versus losing it if you're a young investigator and you're applying for grants. So do you have some comments about that for the group? About keeping their ESI status and why that's important?
Yeah, so, well, and you can jump in here too, but I think mostly it's for, it's in terms of funding pay lines. And so for instance, if you apply, if you have 2 investigators, an associate professor, assistant professor has ESI status applying to NCI, don't remember what the funding pay line is, 9%, right? It's pretty low. Mm-hmm. So if the pay line's 9% and both of them score 12%, and the associate professor is not going to get funded because they're not at the 9% pay line. Sorry, mm-hmm. The lower better, not the high percentage, and say Cancer Center though is funding 15% for ESI, right? Then that assistant professor is going to be, it's going to push them over to get ESI funding. So that's why it's important to maintain your ESI status. That is based on when your degree was conferred, and that should go in your area common system because it's all automatic at this point. So you would just work with your grants manager to make sure that that's there.
Thank you. So I have a question here from Morningside campus. Can a postdoc or PI from Morningside use the resources for the medical center?
Yeah, so part of why we recently put everything behind CAS is so that people in engineering and Morningside can access the Grant Starter Kit. And I've had people attend K-pop from those other schools. However, we tend to not read because it's just a time management thing, but you're more than welcome to look at the Grant Starter Kit and other resources we put there.
Great. We have a question asking for us to share the links for the resources, and yes, we will both share the slides for this talk, and we'll also share resources and links for the things that Danielle spoke about. So we will definitely provide that. Another question, a great talk on the checklists on the website. Some have hyperlinks, some do not. Do you have some advice for how those checklists work and what kinds of things are hyperlinked and what kinds of things aren't?
So all the attachments should have hyperlinks. The things that are important to have hyperlinks, I'll go through and make sure that they are hyperlinked appropriately. But again, like things like the title of that section often correlates to a form that's in the system that you won't necessarily need to know how to fill out. That should be your grants manager helping you. But all of the attachments should be hyperlinked to those instructions. And again, there are templates in the Grant Starter Kit that have those instructions copied and pasted in. So when you can start from a Word document knowing what you need to put into that section.
Great. I would also, here's one. I have another one, but we'll ask this. Can we set up a grant consultation if we aren't sure which grant is most appropriate?
Yes, definitely. Feel free to reach out.
Great. And then I was going to, thanks. And then I was going to ask you about, for the grant editing service and for new investigators applying for their first R01, what kind of advice would you have for people looking at for grant editing in terms of timing? How early should they come to you? How late is too late? And so on.
So the earlier the better. Ideally a month or two ahead of time. And what I've seen has been most successful is if you can at least get us the specific aims page a month or two, hopefully 2 months ahead of time. The specific aims is your roadmap to the entire grant. And so you really want to make sure that that is clear, you know where you're going. Also, that's what reviewers will spend the most time looking at. And so you want to make sure that you're hitting all the key points. And it's not just the 3 reviewers that are going to read and score your grant, right? Everyone else in study section is most likely to read just your aims page and not necessarily your whole grant when they're voting. So you really want to get that down, and you really want to get the logic in terms of how you're presenting everything very solid there. And from there, that will kind of inform how the rest of your grant is written. So most of our grant writers will want at least, they want a month. They will work with people down to 2 weeks. If you get us something in a couple days, all we really can do is a copy edit, especially if our volume is high and we're working with multiple people at any given point. So the earlier the better. We try to be as flexible as possible. But there's no hard rule, but again, earlier the better.
Okay. Another person asking, yes, we will send out the slides and the resources and links after the talk. So don't worry about that if you missed anything. Another question, can you briefly discuss the difference between DoD and NIH funding mechanisms and why we would apply for one mechanism versus the other?
So different funders have different emphasis in terms of what they want to fund. So DoD, if you look at the different programs, they tend to be disease oriented and they tend to want to look at the relevance, both for the entire country, but like they also want to see how it affects, you know, military personnel, et cetera. So they've been really clear about what they want to fund. And most of the success I've seen have been people partnering with people who are currently DoD funded, or they're able to link their application to how it's affecting US military population and their families. Generally, not necessarily a hard, fast rule. Again, NIH tends to be more biomedical funding, and different institutes have different funding areas, and you can go on NCI or NINDS, et cetera, and really look at what they're funding. And it's nice, it's good to align your project with those funding priorities, because then you're more likely to get awarded in that way.
Great. How do we determine our effort on grants, and how do we manage in setting of additional grants with other investigators?
So different mechanisms have different effort requirements. So K awards, you have to devote 75% of your time to research activities. For R1s, I've seen it range from 10% to 50%. Certain ESI mechanisms require even more than that. It depends, okay? And it depends on the grant and what else you have going on, and your requirements to the institution. So if you have 25% clinical time, then you need to spend 25% of your time in clinic. NCI, I think, released some pretty stringent requirements in terms of minimum % effort for grants such as PO1s and R1s. So it's a number of factors that will determine your effort on a grant. You should talk to your grants manager about that, because they can really help you track that and figure out what effort you're portioning where.
Jessica, if that doesn't address your question and you want to unmute yourself, oh, there we go, unmute. Do you want to, I'm sorry, I think I just muted you again. There, Jessica, does that answer your question, or did you want to?
It does. It also highlights I have a lot still to learn, so I'll just keep asking questions. Thank you.
Great, no worries. Let's see if we have any other questions coming in. I have another question for you. You mentioned great support for the K award with K-pop. Is there anything similar through your office or elsewhere on campus for Fs, people applying for F awards?
So that's what we're trying to accomplish with the fellowship info sessions. So there's 2 of them. It's not as much project management as we do with K awards, but we do go through every single requirement of the grant in the first section. In the second section, Ron and Mao kind of lead the discussion in terms of what goes into a specific aims page, the candidate section, and the research strategy. Mm-hmm. We designed it that way because we hoped that if you were a graduate student, you really would be working with your mentor more closely. Often with postdocs and assistant professors, they're a little bit more independent, or if you're a clinician, they're balancing multiple priorities, which is why we have that project management service. It doesn't mean that if we get feedback from the students that we don't do something similar, where every week we send out an email or we meet multiple times leading up to the deadline. I'm open to suggestions.
Great, okay. I do not see any other questions coming in on the chat. This is your chance to drop something in there if you have anything else that you want to ask. In the meantime, while I'm waiting for people to ask that, I will give you a few additional comments. I got a thank you, great presentation, by the way. So just if you do have a question, just drop it in there in the last few minutes. Again, thank you very much to Danielle. It's a wonderful set of resources on campus. As I said, we will be sending you guys out resources from this, also with the slides that Danielle hopefully can share, and we will follow up with a survey. We are back next Tuesday and next Wednesday with additional seminars for our community. Next Tuesday, we'll continue with our Resources for Research series, which features 2 of our shared resources at the Cancer Center. And next Wednesday, we are continuing with our Research in Progress series with 2 of our recent members, 2 assistant professors recently recruited and recently joining the Cancer Center. So please join us for either or both of those. And I think we're finished with questions. Danielle, thank you very much. Thank you everyone for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Bye everyone.